Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll take a moment as people are slowly starting to trickle in. It is so wonderful to see all of you here. I invite you, please share in the chat where you're connecting with us tonight. We have people tuning in from various parts of the world, from various crews, organizations. Please feel free to share your name, your pronoun if you wish, and to lift up any groups, any communities that you move with so that we can measure the fullness of our power here tonight. Please feel free to share so in the chat. All right, this is an incredible gathering. We'll just take a moment, get to see everyone who's tuned in here. A lot of dear people near and far, including many people who were interlocutors, comrades, friends of June Jordan. So honored to be with all of you tonight. I want to begin by sharing gratitude to everyone for tuning in here. This is Living Room, June Jordan's Legacy in a Time of Genocide, Policing, and Trump's Return. My name is Connor Tomas Reed. I also go by Coco. I'm the author of New York Liberation School with Common Notions. And I want to begin by singing praise for the one and only June Jordan, who dedicated her life to social transformation in all of its beauties and complexities, to creating Living Room, and who impacted so many of us across generations and across places. In different moments in my life, across both the darkest and most delightful times, I've often asked myself, what would June Jordan do? And so I'm grateful to reflect on her legacy with all of you, and in particular to focus on these three themes in the title of this event. And to do so, we're so lucky to have three brilliant and inspiring people who are doing life expanding work today. And that's Erica Edwards, Marina Magloire, and Patricia Spears Jones. Tonight's event is a family affair. Many comrades, friends, family, and loved ones are nestled here. I want to share gratitude to the crews who helped to make tonight happen: the Center for the Humanities, Lost and Found, the CUNY Poetics Document Initiative, and CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, all at the CUNY Graduate Center, as well as Common Notions and Wendy's Subway. I'm proud to have caused good, purposeful trouble with all of y'all across the years. I also want to shout out friends who are tuning in who were a part of the Life Studies June Jordan reading group that we did at Wendy's Subway this October. And I'll share the syllabus and the readings list in the chat. I invite all of you now to take just a moment and to call in even more people to this occasion. I invite you to call in your departed relatives, your given and chosen lineages, those who you have never met, but who see as entwined with your own liberation. Tonight, let's hold close the people who have been massacred, displaced, or are facing repression in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Korea, Syria, and beyond. Those who have been resisting colonization in Puerto Rico, Hawaii, the Philippines, Kashmir, Aotearoa, Australia, Abya Yala, and beyond. Those like Jordan Neely and Herman Whitfield, and so many before, whose lives were stolen by racist vigilantes and police. And those luminous elders like Nikki Giovanni, who are now scheming and dreaming besides June and our other beloved ancestors. They are all here with us. So, with this event, we sounded the call to create more living room today through June Jordan's life and work, and all of you responded. So, thank you for being here. An irrepressible aspect of June's record is its many manifold stages, its steady movement. Some of y'all here may have read June's poems, or essays, or plays, or fiction, or speeches, cared for by Jan Heller Levy and Sarah Miles. Some of you may know of June's early journalism, her housing advocacy, urban design, and youth literacy programs, alongside Malcolm X, Francis Fox Piven, Buckminster Fuller, and Terry Bush. Some of you may know of June's time at City College of New York in the late 60s to late 70s, when she inspired Black and Puerto Rican students to create Harlem University and to transform CUNY's admissions, studies, and relationship to the world, alongside Toni Cade Bambara, Barbara Christian, David Henderson, Audre Lorde, and Adrienne Rich. Some of you know of June's opposition to policing, racial supremacy, sexual and gendered violence, alongside Alexis DeVoe, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Gwendolyn Hardwick. Some of you know of June's involvement in the Black feminist writers' circle, The Sisterhood, alongside Toni Morrison, Ntozake Shange, Alice Walker, and many others, including one of tonight's speakers, Patricia Spears Jones. Some of you know of June's commitment to anti-colonial internationalism, her focus on liberation struggles in Angola, Guatemala, Iraq, Ireland, Lebanon, Nicaragua, Palestine, South Africa, and elsewhere. And there are some of you here tonight who may be coming in as wide-eyed newcomers, to whom we say, welcome home. We'll be covering lots of material tonight about Jordan's legacy, but we'll also really just be scratching the surface. So I invite all of you to read and to listen voraciously across her work and related tributaries. But I want to emphasize that although, yes, this will be a June Jordan love fest, she was one complex, fallible human being in a much larger web of intentional collaborations. Like all of us here, she responded to a worldwide call across generations to create more living room. So may we learn from her legacy while also not lionizing her to impossible heights so that we don't carry the work forward that she and many others contributed to. So for our flow tonight, we'll get to hear from Erica, Marina, and Patricia in that order. And then we'll have ample time for questions and comments from all of you before some closing announcements. And as we go, I invite you to write down your thoughts to share when we all come together. Now, before I introduce our three speakers, I want to bring in June's voice into this space with us as well. We'll hear her read two short poems, one entitled These Poems, and the other entitled I Must Become a Menace to My Enemies, to situate our work tonight. And I'll put the links in the chat and ask for Matt to get those queued up. Thank you.
These poems, they are things that I do in the dark, reaching for you, whoever you are. And are you ready? These words, they are stones in the water, running away. These skeletal lines, they are desperate arms for my longing and love. I am a stranger, learning to worship the strangers around me. Whoever you are, whoever I may become. The poem is called I Must Become a Menace to My Enemies, and it's dedicated to the poet Agostinho Neto, who is the president of the People's Republic of Angola. I will no longer lightly walk behind a one of you who fear me. Be afraid. I plan to give you reasons for your jumpy fits and facial tics. I will not walk politely on the pavements anymore, and this is dedicated in particular to those who hear my footsteps or the insubstantial rattling of my grocery cart, then turn around, see me, and hurry on away from this impressive terror I must be. I plan to blossom bloody on an afternoon, surrounded by my comrades singing terrible revenge in merciless, accelerating rhythms, but I have watched a blind man studying his face. I have set the table in the evening and sat down to eat the news. Regularly, I have gone to sleep. There is no one to forgive me. The dead do not give a damn. I live like a lover who drops her dime into the phone just as the subway shakes into the station, wasting her message, canceling the question of her call. Fulminating or forgetful but late, and always after the fact that could save or condemn me. I must become the action of my fate. How many of my brothers and my sisters will they kill before I teach myself retaliation? Shall we pick a number? South Africa, for instance. Do we agree that more than 10,000 in less than a year, but that less than 5,000 slaughtered in more than 6 months? Well, what is the matter with me? I must become a menace to my enemies, and if I ever let you slide, who should be extirpated from my universe, who should be cauterized from Earth completely, law and order jerk-offs of the first, the terrorist degree, then let my body fail my soul in its bedeviled lecheries, and if I ever let love go, because the hatred and the whisperings become a phantom dictate I obey in lieu of impulse and realities, the blossoming flamingos of my wild mimosa trees, then let love freeze me out. I must become, I must become a menace to my enemies.
June Jordan here with us tonight. We'll now get to hear from Erica Edwards, Marina Magloire, and Patricia Spears Jones. Erica Edwards is professor of African American Studies and English at Yale University. She's the author of The Other Side of Terror, Black Women and the Culture of U.S. Empire, and Charisma and the Fictions of Black Leadership. She is also the co-editor of Keywords for African American Literature. Marina Magloire is a scholar and educator who specializes in writing about Black women's archives for a general audience. She is currently an assistant professor of English at Emory University. She is the author of We Pursue Our Magic, A Spiritual History of Black Feminism. Patricia Spears Jones is a poet, educator, cultural activist, and anthologist. She is the 2023 New York State Poet Laureate and recipient of the 2017 Jackson Poetry Prize. Her several full-length collections and chapbooks include The Beloved Community and A Lucent Fire. And with that, Erica, please take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. I just want to begin by saying it's such a tremendous honor to be here with all of you, students and loved ones of June Jordan. I especially want to thank Connor Thomas Reed, whose own work has taught us so much about this incredible freedom fighter and the world that she lived into. And I just want to thank the whole team at CUNY, and thank you especially to all of you for joining us. So Connor suggested that we might start with, we might think about opening up with a reading of June Jordan's work. And so I thought I would start with a few words from this 1984 essay, Life After Lebanon. Actually, I'm going to do two readings. So this is the first one. This was an essay written 2 years after the massacre of Palestinians at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Lebanon. 2 years after Jordan took Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde to task for their equation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in the way that Marina so carefully called our attention to. So this is what she wrote, just a few lines there. For a long time, I believed that the problem was that of misinformation. If only Americans knew the truth of things, then they would rally to help, to stop the invasion, the slaughter. What I gradually began to understand, however, was something importantly different. The problem was not one of misinformation or ignorance. The problem was that the Lebanese people in general and that the Palestinian people in particular are not white men. They have never been white men. Hence, they were and they are only Arabs or terrorists or animals. Certainly, they were not men and women and children. Certainly, they were not human beings with rights remotely comparable to the rights of white men. She continues, in fact, the intellectual community, including the feminist community of North America and the entire community of the political left in America, were separated into two seemingly irreconcilable groups, two at a minimum. There are those for whom Israel remained a sacrosanct subject, exempt from rational discussion and dispute, and there were those to whom Israel looked a whole lot like yet another country run by white men whose militarism tended to produce racist consequences, i.e., the disenfranchisement and subjugation of non-white peoples, with the construction of an ultimate taboo, a taboo behind which the fate of an entire people, the Palestinians, might be erased. How could there be an intellectual, a moral life after Lebanon in this country? I have to answer my own question this way because many people in the United States and around the globe are not now, nor have they ever been white men. Here and in South Africa and in Nicaragua and in Amsterdam and in England, I see a new woman. She frequently wears a uniform. She often carries a gun. She puts down her body to block missiles and bullets alike. She grieves for the dead, but she fights back to honor the dead. I wanted to start there, and then I'll just do one other short reading. This one is called Another Poem About the Man, published in 1985's collection, Living Room. That was, 2 years after the invasion of Grenada in Operation Urgent Fury. Importantly, that was a military operation and occupation that diverted the Navy that was headed to Lebanon and diverted it to Grenada. So another poem about the man who brought you the garbage can, the graveyard, the gross out, the grim gram, the grubby grabbing, bloody blabbing nightly news, now brings you Grenada. Helicopters grating nutmeg trees, rifles shiny on the shell-shocked sand, the beautiful laundry of the bombs falling into fresh air, artillery and tanks up against a half-naked girl and her boyfriend. Another great success brought to you by trash, delivering more trash to smash and despoil the papaya, the breadfruit and the bloodroot, shattered and blood spattered, from freedom rammed down the throat of Grenada. Now Grenada, she sing no more. Grenada now, Grenada, she sing no more. She lose, she sky to Yankee invaders. Grenada now, Grenada, she sing no more. So, thank you for listening to those words. I wanted to say before I say anything else that writing about June Jordan really changed me. I was writing a book about African American literature after the 1960s. And it was a book about the remaking and repackaging of the Black freedom struggle in the book industry. It was about how over the decades since the 1960s social movements, you could read more and more books about Black people, so many that you could maybe live under the illusion that Black books on your coffee table or on your syllabus could compensate for the 500,000 Black folks behind bars, compensate for the one big one in the White House, or the one who sold us the war in Iraq. My book was becoming a book about the sort of entanglement of literature and militarism, and how this entanglement was caught up with how easy it was to repackage the history of Black liberation. It was turning out to be a rather dark book about the end of the Black freedom struggle. So I decided to start over. And I started over by reading everything I could find that June Jordan wrote, every essay, every poem, and then reading Valerie Kinloch's biography, and then reading June Jordan's letters and notebooks and her unpublished play. And ultimately, that was a re-education. And after reading and rereading June Jordan, I started rereading Toni K. Bambara, Jordan's dear friend, and thinking about the role of creative work and surrealist practice and staying well and friendship, the role of all of these things in remaking the world, so that a book that was becoming a book about defeat and co-optation became a book about ethical living in progressive community. The re-education via, my re-education via Jordan and Bambara wasn't just about my book, though. It was about this key concern in Jordan's work. How does one live an ethical life given the repressions of the late 20th century and early 21st century governance? The prohibition against speaking of Palestine, for example, but also unchecked militarism, the anti-unionism, the accumulating anti-Blackness. The question for me became, how does one become new? And it seems to me that the call that Jordan made in her 1984 essay, Life After Lebanon, the call for new women, women of truth-telling and self-defense, is a call that she was able to make after her own re-educations. And I think there were many. There was the time she spent with Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi, a time I've learned from Alexis Pauline Gumbs to regard as this crucial moment of ecological attention to Black liberation. There was a time she spent working with Buckminster Fuller on the redesign of Harlem, the time she spent at the American Academy in Rome. There was also the re-education that she received on the literal streets of Brooklyn when she survived a police riot with Alexis DeVoe and Gwendolyn Hardwick, and the re-education she took when she went on call to Nicaragua during the Nicaraguan Revolution. And of course, the re-education of bearing witness from afar to the massacre of Palestinian refugees at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. So in what remains of my time, I want to think a bit about the role of friendship in this re-education. And I'll start here. So the dark pink lipstick kiss print is still visible at the top of a letter between friends dated July 1982. The dramatist and actress Gwen Hardwick writes to the writer and organizer June Jordan, received your letter one evening after coming home, after having come home from work, after having read articles in The Voice regarding the acts of genocide against the Lebanese and Palestinian people in the name of a Jewish state. Who will secure the state of the Lebanese and Palestinians? I'm reading these articles and feeling such shame that the human race continues such inhumanity upon itself. Sometimes I wonder what in the world I'm doing here in this time and space. Hardwick goes on to list the scenes of destruction that make 1980 and 1982 New York feel like the end of the world. The poor Black and Latinx folks in the East Bronx and Lower East Side, police murder in New York, the British arrogance in the Malvinas, the influx of Haitian refugees to the United States. And what about the Black South Africans? El Salvador, she asks. And at the end of this litany, Hardwick includes a few simple notes of care, gratitude for the communication, wishes for a speedy recovery after a recent operation. Then, I love you, another imprint of lipstick, and then, as if an afterthought, happy birthday. We could read Hardwick's opening and closing kiss marks as extralingual pieces of code. The first one, an invitation to communicate on terms other than those fossilized in newsprint, an initiation into a time and space that is other than here. And the second mark, a haptic benediction. In the midst of the anotherness of it all, another bombing, another occupation, another election, there was this an initiation, an invitation, a reminder, a re-education? The internationalization of Jordan's activism and writing in the early 1980s articulated what Zahra Ali calls new political mappings, when the grammars of the long war on terror were collapsing the distance between Brooklyn and Beirut or Grenada and Pretoria. Her internationalism also called upon close personal connections as its motor or its form of power. Jordan's literature was resistance literature. It drew on her long commitment to crafting space in poetry and in other genres of writing to train the reader to see the world differently. And it metabolized the lessons Jordan was learning about tenderness, creativity, and conviction in collectives like the Sisterhood, the autonomous organization that centered collaboration rather than competition and saw as its urgent mission the protection of Black women's creativity. Jordan's relationship to Hardwick during this time was one of many intimate political relations that she forged with the New Women against the backdrop of early 1980s intelligence. Intelligence meaning both repression through the extraction of counterinsurgent knowledge and the affirmative practice of knowledge production. These relationships with Hardwick and Alexis DeVoe, or Sarah Miles, or Ndazaki Shange, or Alice Walker, Ethelbert Miller, Tony Kevavara, Adol Adnan, and of course, Adrian Torf, and others were based in mutual desires to marshal love, language, and bodily strength in the war between what Jordan called the true pro-life forces and the US trained armies and operatives that were experimenting with the techniques of torture and extraction and mass intimidation that would later be unmasked in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and on the streets of the US. Jordan's 1980s poetry and nonfiction provide an insurgent map of all the places Hardwick mentions and many more besides, where partially aligned or not aligned Black and Indigenous peoples were fighting for freedom throughout the late Cold War years. Her work develops a spatial imaginary for justice that governing language otherwise obscures, as Keith Feldman put it. This spatial imaginary materialized in her poetry and nonfiction on Palestine, South Africa, and Nicaragua as a very scalar analysis that Jordan referred to in Civil Wars when she wrote of all the places one's commitment to one's people leads, from the inside of one's own skull to as far as Angola. Jordan's internationalist imaginary of justice faced off against the Reagan administration's campaign to rid the earth of the threat of communism, a campaign that used the language of democratic idealism to cover for imperial expansion and capitalist plunder, and a sheer thirst to rid the US of its so-called Vietnam syndrome. Visiting Nicaragua in the aftermath of the Sandinista revolution, during which US-funded Contras were actively staging a brutal assault on Nicaraguan civil society, Jordan went on call, as she referred to her mission, to canvass a point of intensity along the itinerary of a long war on terror. At a moment when Latin America was a laboratory for the US's development of more pragmatic and flexible imperial strategies, the US military lent authority and might to its rise as a global superpower in the late 20th century. The region served as a training ground for US foreign policy and military strategy. It's important to note that the production of terrorism as a category of knowledge and the terrorist as a figure to be punished solidified in the 1970s, a decade during which the US government valorized the state of Israel and its military as a model for defense. After Vietnam, as Melanie McAllister suggests, Israel, in fact, became a prosthetic for Americans. The long arm of Israeli vengeance extended the body of an American nation no longer sure of its own reach. Throughout the following decade, then, in the 1980s, US aggression in Latin America, and particularly in Grenada and in the Central American countries of Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua, provided the terms for counterinsurgent rhetoric and warfare that would mature in the latter end of the War on Terror. So in Nicaragua, the CIA Director William Casey and National Security Council's Oliver North funded counterinsurgents through the covert transnational exchange now known as the Iran-Contra scandal. They also funded mercenaries from other Central American countries. Suspending the scholarly distance Jordan might achieve by using commas and keeping with the Black feminist punctuation of what I like to call the backslash, she explained it as like this: armed and goaded by the CIA, Contra troops based in Honduras daily invaded Nicaragua border towns, blowing up bridges, burning hospitals, ambushing international press personnel, murdering doctors, blowing up babies and tobacco barns. Sorry. With her two collections, then, On Call and On Call, a book of essays, and Living Room, a book of poetry, Jordan defied publishing difficulties she faced after her writings on Palestine appeared in print the summer or 2 summers before. And On Call, she studies the map of the Reagan frontier and dissects the official state language that justified the bloody counterinsurgency in Nicaragua. Recounting her travel to Managua in Nicaragua, why I had to go there, Jordan begins with the sarcastic quotation marks that have by then become characteristics of her prose. I had to go to Nicaragua, that Central American country of 2.7 million people, that place as small as the state of Iowa, that front page first world nation with the population spread as meagerly as what you'd find in the Sahara Desert, that home of Indian, African, Spanish women and men mostly doing without running water and electricity, that threat to national security, that backyard, front yard monster of Marxist Leninism, repeatedly conjured up by the White House cowboy as the menace to our credibility around the world. The truth-telling mission that Jordan undertook was, as she intimates here, a sociolinguistic one and a geographic one. It was a study in the way language arranged the Reagan frontier. She challenged her readers to examine their assumptions about Central America. Unless you're careful, you might conclude that Nicaragua is nowhere and that nobody lives there. So why not do whatever might cross your imperial mind, she asked. And then she wrote of the bodily postures of vulnerability that refuse and indict that imperial mind. Traveling through Central America to bear witness to the struggle for real democracy, she wrote, this journey is a harrowing hopscotch, and I feel there's no controlling the odds. Either I leave or I accept the palpably enveloping chances of death. The strain of such ultimate alert tires the body. But as the Sandinistas say, the enemy is everywhere. And as I move among the intricate disasters, as I track through the spreading blood stain of US foreign policy, there's no denying this is the truth of things. When she's there, her vehicle runs out of gas and she has to sleep in a public park. And she's protected there until dawn by Sandinistas who patrol the surroundings, watching for watchers. She finds out that the militia patrolling the street is made up of young women who talk and laugh to stay awake while watching for the enemy. One of them tells her, you see, we never sleep. And Jordan writes, I look at the trusting of her 26-year-old face. In my mind, I flip through images of North American nuclear weapons and fighter planes and cluster bombs, and I lower my eyes and turn away from her. She can't imagine the evil might of this enemy she thinks to deter with laughing young women who must struggle to stay awake. Just after this, a 15-year-old boy takes her inside to rest in a police station, and they talk about poetry until dawn. Even now, Jordan writes, I can hear Faustino talking to me softly, close to the ending of the night, which leads her to ask finally, how many of these gentle people have I helped to kill just by paying my taxes? Here, of course, friendship in conditions of war prompts an important question about citizenship and complicity. Jordan's work in the late 1970s and early 1980s theorized the long war on terror as a regime whose front line was language. While she decoded the grammars of counterinsurgency, she encoded messages of liberation in Black English, in undomesticated Black militant speech. Of course, Jordan crafted her work with a keen eye toward the discourse of counterterrorism and the protection of US security interests in the Middle East. As she organized and created in defiance of the ultimate taboo of Palestinian self-determination, she applied her analyses of the male white rhetoric about borders and national security and terrorism and democracy and vital interests. And she exploded the conventions of political writing and behavior in US literary culture. She had to go there. And so I would just end by asking, where are all the places we have to go, and whose hands and whose kiss prints and whose benedictions will accompany us? Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. That was phenomenal. We'll now hear from Marina. You have the floor.
Okay. I am so honored to be the hinge between what Erica calls re-education through friendship and an actual friend of June Jordan, who had the privilege of knowing her, which I would in this realm, which I wish I would have also had. Throughout this, throughout my remarks, I'm going to reference briefly my own essay that I've written about June Jordan and Audre Lorde. So I am copying it and putting it in the chat for those of you who have not read it. And I am just going to go ahead and share my screen to get started. So I also want to talk about friendship, but I want to talk about friendship actually as I want to talk about the difference between comradeship and friendship, which I think is something that is somewhat implicit throughout June Jordan's work and something that might have contributed to the kind of breakdowns and conflicts that we see in my essay. So for those of you who haven't read it, my essay, Moving Towards Life, is about the conflict between June Jordan, among many, many people. There are actually probably 10 or 12 people involved. But I chose to focus on a conflict on the conflict between June Jordan and Audre Lorde specifically. Because of their biographical similarities as West Indian immigrant descended poets who had similar politics, both died of breast cancer, and actually had this huge falling out in which, as far as we know, maybe some of you who were friends with her can tell me differently, but as far as we know, they never spoke to each other again after this moment of 1982 when their mutual friend, Adrienne Rich, signed two Zionist letters, or two letters identifying as a Zionist feminist in the midst of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And after the massacres at Sabra and Shatila, it was later found out that they didn't know the massacres at Sabra and Shatila had happened when they signed the letter. But that doesn't necessarily, that was not really an excuse for June Jordan. So Audre Lorde and a number of other Black and Jewish feminists defended Adrienne Rich against June Jordan's kind of public call out that she was seeking to publish. not just to call out, not just to, I mean, she chose to call out Adrienne Rich publicly because of their friendship and because of the fact that Adrienne Rich was the most prominent figure on those Zionist open letters. But I think June Jordan also chose to call her out because she had really rigorous political expectations of her friends. And that's something that we're going to be discussing today, I think, in the difference between friendship and comradeship. So a place where I'm not going to quote extensively from June Jordan today, but a place where I saw the word comrade and have discussed with my own comrades its role in this poem and in June Jordan's legacy as a whole is in I Must Become a Menace to My Enemies, which we heard at the beginning of this Zoom call. So I want to call attention to it. I plan to blossom bloody on an afternoon, surrounded by my comrades singing terrible revenge in merciless, accelerating rhythms. So I'm an academic, but I also come from a background of political and popular education. I have a popular education program called Third World Feminist School. I'm also part of Black Alliance for Peace. So the term comrade is something that is a term that is often thrown around in organizing circles, I would say, that I'm part of, more so than academic circles. Um, and I think different people would have different opinions on what that means. But the way in which I want to distill it is a relationship in which you have shared political goals and in which you can make political demands of the other person, which might not be the case in the case of a friendship. A friendship might not have political alignment at all. So I turned to this instance of conflict between two friends. And maybe we can, hopefully in the Q&A, maybe for those of you who knew her or people who are a little bit more embedded in in research around her time at CUNY with Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde can tell me a little bit more about what comradeship might have looked like at this time. But it felt like a very salient question to think about at this time after October 7th when I had known about this conflict between June Jordan and Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde and others for quite some time. It was kind of an open secret and a very well-trafficked archive at Spelman. And in fact, Erica is one of the only academics that I know of to have ever written about that incident um, before before I did in my essay. So it just seemed like a particularly salient question at a time when Black feminist opinions and support of Palestine were being kind of conflated, I thought, after October 7th. I think the there just seemed to be this kind of idea in the air and on social media that Black feminists have always unilaterally supported the liberation of the Palestinian people at all times and in all ways. And here I saw this example in the historical register where it wasn't true. And just because people were friends with one another interpersonally actually didn't mean that they shared alignment on this issue. And that seemed like a really important question for us to return to, us meaning people who support the liberation of the Palestinian people at this time, because it's actually kind of a question of praxis. Like, how do you stand up for the Palestinian people and how do you stand up for the people of Palestine from the belly of the beast in empire? And what does that mean? And what does that do to your relationships? So in the case of Audre Lorde, um, I think if you are interested in learning a little bit more about June Jordan's friendship with Audre Lorde, Alexis Pauline Gumbs has written about this quite extensively, both in her recent biography of Audre Lorde and in a letter from, here, let me actually, I'm going to put it in the chat as well, in an unpublished archival letter that June Jordan actually wrote to Audre Lorde. That June Jordan actually wrote to Audre Lorde after her death, which was interesting. So I put that in the chat. How do I keep presenting? So I'm just going to read the end of the letter, I guess, that of the posthumous letter. And alongside that, I have a letter from one of the. There's not a lot of correspondence necessarily between Audre Lorde and June Jordan. They're always talking about wanting to have more time to hang out with each other, but not having time to hang out with each other. But this posthumous letter at the end reads, "Here are my flowers blooming like jasmine. Here is the flame of my faith. Here are the words that death cannot spell or delete. Here is my love that I place in your capable hands until we meet again, face to face." So it's interesting to me that, there's this expression of love from June Jordan after Audre Lorde passed away, but actually her last words to Audre Lorde were, "You have behaved in a wrong and unethical manner. May you live well with that." In 1982, those were the actual last words that we find in correspondence, because it seems to me that in June Jordan's mind, June Jordan had kind of put out this call of comradeship in denouncing not just Adrienne Rich as a Zionist, but denouncing Zionism as a concept. That in her mind, Audre Lorde, who was her friend, had not answered. So it seems more like a failure of comradeship than friendship. And clearly she had so much love here for Audre Lorde, even after her death. But I really want to think through, I guess, the fact that they never reconciled, and why couldn't they? I don't want to say that Audre Lorde couldn't have been a comrade, and clearly like that is what June Jordan was expecting and asking of her. But it's interesting, the fact that, where we really see a paper trail of rigorous political engagement and both and two friends pushing one another is in the paper trail between June Jordan and Adrienne Rich, actually. So needless to say, that the 1982 open letter, like June Jordan's 1982 open letter calling out Adrienne Rich, did result in a rupture in their relationship. But that rupture lasted about 4 years. They ran into each other haphazardly, and I write about this a little bit in the essay, but they ran into each other haphazardly and kind of rekindled their relationship. But you see these kinds of moments of spikiness come up throughout the rest of their decades of friendship afterwards. So here we have one instance of June Jordan sending sending Adrienne Rich an article on anti-Zionist feminism, and Adrienne Rich actually being really offended. In the middle paragraph, used the last sentence. Since you know that I work with New Jewish Agenda, an organization committed to a vision of progressive Jewish politics, I'm struck by the sending of this article, which feels like an obliquely provocative gesture. I'll tell you a little bit more about the article in a moment. But something else that's interesting is the way that that some of these writers will some of these comradeships that June Jordan is kind of pushing people to where June Jordan is kind of pushing people to consider a different kind of politics, or some of the comradeships where people's politics are building upon one another. People will do that through poetry. Unfortunately, I actually didn't excerpt the right. I actually didn't excerpt the right archival photo for this particular archival incident. But Adrienne Rich also wrote June Jordan a poem, I guess, appended to this letter, which I think was kind of interesting. And just to give you a little bit of context for maybe why Adrienne Rich might have been offended actually by June Jordan's sending of this article to her. Okay, here's a quote from the article itself. In practice, to be accounted for politically has, for Jewish feminists, meant, if not a clear competition with Black feminists, an attempt to at least jump on their bandwagon and mechanically equate their struggles against oppression. So this is actually kind of the substance of some of the critique that June Jordan had leveled against Adrienne Rich in 1982, right? This idea that that June Jordan or that Adrienne Rich was kind of claiming oppression without actually living it. So I guess you can see that there's still kind of the thorn of that conflict, even though this is 5 years after the conflict. But I thought that I thought that June Jordan's response was pretty interesting. Starting at the bottom of the first paragraph. I not only mailed a copy to you, I simultaneously sent copies to Angela and one to Alice W. and one to Sarah Miles. I think that Angela will quite possibly not agree with my interpretation of JB's ideas or my own ideas on identity politics, and I have no idea what Alice or Sarah will think of these thoughts. I do think that JB brilliantly tests the issue, who you are versus what you do. And I felt eager to let my closest intellectual comrades have a look, whether they will agree or disagree with JB, me, or whatever. It is for the same reason that I sent the essay to you. So I think this, I think this is actually like a really, I don't know. I mean, it's just a really clearly stated, it's a very clearly stated and actually like even-handed for somebody who's known as, I mean, I think every time that or lots of times it kind of annoys me a little bit when I sometimes talk about June Jordan's very fiery open letter to Adrienne Rich in the first place, her very fiery letter back to Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich for trying to block the open, or back to Audre Lorde and Barbara Smith for trying to block the open letter. A lot of people are like, oh, well, June Jordan was just a hothead, and that was just her mode of engaging with people and engaging with her friends. And I'm like, no, June Jordan was mad that there was a literal genocide going on in her, and she did not feel that her friends were responding appropriately, as I would also be angry. So here you see a kind of different way that June Jordan is dealing with conflict here. Not at all a fiery tone, not that she's not justified to use a fiery tone. But you can see the end here. I am truly sorry that this fall has dealt with you so severely, and I am sorry that I am so GD tired, and I am pissed that it seems we must deal through the mail as laboriously as all of this on matters that face to face would duly yield to a comparatively simple conversation between obvious friends. And here is a new poem I finally put together, and here is my love to you. So yeah, I I think this is actually a really interesting model of the way that maybe June Jordan also that June Jordan, like, I guess, was maybe treading more carefully with this particular relationship that was broken and then repaired than she had in the beginning. And I think you can also see this kind of care evidenced in some of her other relationships where she's not creating friction with her friends just for the sake of creating friction. She is creating friction with her friends because inadvertently because she wants her closest intellectual comrades to share something with her. Um, so I think you see this a lot in her relationship with Alice Walker, which has decades long of beautiful correspondence. Some of the first correspondence that Alice Walker ever sends to June Jordan is about police brutality against some of her students at Tougaloo. And then you later see June Jordan in some of her published poetry taking up those themes. There are a lot of really beautiful unpublished poems that Alice Walker sends to June Jordan, including this one on crying in public for June, Sister of Mercy, because June always gets distressed apparently by the amount that Alice cries in public. But you know, the end of the poem kind of assures her crying like loving someone strange may not flatter us, but like loving someone strange, it escapes the category of being wrong. I guess I also wanted to highlight Etel at her correspondence with Etel Adnan as well. Etel Adnan being someone who really kind of, I mean, politicized her around Lebanon, but wasn't like the person. I mean, I guess like Atel Adnan being somebody who seemed really gratified by Jordan's engagement with Lebanon, and then kind of continued to engage with her on the issue and politicize her around the issue, like, and you know, up until June Jordan ended up going to Lebanon herself in 1996. But it's kind of interesting because in some of their early correspondence, they're not talking about Lebanon at all. They're talking about Nicaragua. And because June Jordan writes poems about Nicaragua, then Atel Adnan writes poems about Nicaragua. So even just the kind of dialogic call and response of this unpublished poetry that they're kind of sharing with each other as a form of comradeship is really, really beautiful and merits careful consideration as a methodology. I'm going to end here with a picture of some of my own comrades who are pictured here reading June Jordan poems in the club. One of these people actually was in Coco's class. None of them are academics, and they were all just very inspired by June Jordan's legacy in such a way that really makes me think, you know, I wanted June Jordan's archive and her writings around Palestine that weren't published or that weren't as well known to be out in the public for this very reason, because I think a lot of people do draw strength and inspiration from them. And I think this is a really important part at this time in the kind of like in a kind of like anti-hagiography that we can have of June Jordan, like in the way that a lot of Black feminists get conscripted into this like sainthood or motherhood. Like to me, it is clear June Jordan is not my mother. June Jordan is my comrade. And I think when she shows up in these kinds of political spaces and party spaces, in spaces that are so in these like kind of spaces of life, it just makes it increasingly clear to me that she's here in a way that is not saintly and removed. She's here in a form of comradeship. And I will end there and pass it on to someone that I know was a friend and comrade of hers. So very excited to hear Patricia speak.
Thank you, Marina, for these powerful recoverings of June and raising the stakes of what it means to call each other comrades. And we'll now get to hear from Patricia. Please take it away.
Wow. Well, those are incredible. I'm not an academic, so I'm like, oh my goodness, you guys have been very busy, working very hard. I just want to, given that you were talking about the difference, I'm going to talk about friendship because in 1996, June and Adrian wrote poems to each other. Dear June, dear Adrian, that are in We Are On. And it starts with Adrian saying, June is the 1st of June, the light is powerful. This is Pacific out there, giving light and light for light. My heart feels sick and broken. I promise you, but sick. The muse of despair seems to have moved. And it ends with a poem from June, literally a few weeks later. This says, this then is the lens to magnify, ignite, redeem, and willingly defy the maggots eager for that moment when our spirits die, and dying, deify the fearsome, meretricious killer agencies that jeopardize the bird song of our days. Oh, Adrian, this is that love. It is here between us, growing. I want to remind everybody that June was a poet, that was her calling, and more than anything else, but that she also was an amazing essayist, and or probably one of the best in the 20th and 21st centuries. And I'm going to shift this a little bit away from Palestine to think about June as someone who, for decades, really focused on human and civil rights in different ways and how they are repressed and suppressed and how you resist that. And a few years ago, I was on a panel and I wrote a series of notes. And so I'm going to read them because, well, I wrote them. And then in addition, because I had to do this panel today, 9 notes for June Jordan panel. Now, note number 1. And some of this is going to be going back to some of the things that both Erica and Marina said. June was an urban planner, an educator, an innovator. She collaborated with Buckminster Fuller on the design of a, quote, skyrise for Harlem, which I just love, in which Harlem's residents are provided with new homes while being allowed to, quote, remain on site, unquote, while new and innovative buildings are created. When this proposed design was published in Esquire, of all places, they listed her only as a writer and changed the project's title, thus the optimistic tone of the piece. It is one of those moments where the radical or innovative work of a woman, especially a Black woman, is either uncredited or misrepresented. 2. I've been reading June Jordan's poetry and prose since the 1970s. One of the great achievements of We're On, the June Jordan Reader, is that there are works that I never read or got to see, such as The Issue, a play that was read at the Public Theater and appears to have not been produced in its entirety. Theater people, where the hell are you? Excuse me. In an era when the theater professionals are in search of precedent-setting work by women, by African Americans, especially on issues of political organizing, social justice, police misconduct, this work cries out to be staged. 3. As with Lorraine Hansberry's post A Raisin in the Sun plays, Jordan often deals with intra and interracial dynamics, with gender, and ultimately with the ways in which conservative patriarchal norms diminish or dismiss imaginative, innovative, and progressive ideas. Why is a Black woman's vision of these issues so difficult for audiences or at least critics to understand and accept, especially in the theater? The issue should be staged. 4. Jordan's poetry, her essays, her physical beauty, her howling laughter was so very present for so very long. When the Poetry Project asked me to write an obituary, I shared that task with many others because no one person could get June. 5. June placed huge demands on her craft and art. One way you can see this is her continuous critique of American language. And this is, I think, where both Marina and Erica are really talking about what happens when we talk about political conflicts on a national and global level. How do you talk about it? And therein engenders conflict. Not everybody's going to agree. Not everybody's going to be a comrade. And I know for a fact that June and Audrey and all they're all incredibly competitive people. That is why they didn't get along so well. Okay, let's be real. Okay, let's go on. One way you can see is her continuous critique of American language, how white, quote unquote, language, the language of political and cultural power, oppressed Black people and others and suppressed the most interesting agents of American culture, such as the Black vernacular. Whether using her version of, quote, Black English in His Own Where, or teaching a course in which Black English was the dominant language, Jordan demanded attention to the power and craft of Black English, even as his critics undid much of the good work she and others had done to more effectively educate Black people. So I think of her as an incredible educator. She returns over and over again to issues around curriculum. Why do Americans not think about the Palestinians? Why? Because they don't know anything. That their ignorance is their bliss, or the allowing any number of horrible things to happen, whether in Palestine or Grenada or anywhere else. Okay. What is striking to me is how segregated the New York City June worked in, how this cultural and community separation instituted all kinds of social, economic, aesthetic boundaries, and how willing she was to cross, jump over, or knock down or in T is to make work and to have a life as a Black American woman writer. So then when she talks about Phyllis Wheatley, when she talks about what women, when she really goes into like foundational poets, she talks about how they are treated, right? And at one point when her, I think Passion came out, I can't remember if it's Passion or the other book, and she got no reviews for her book of poetry, like none. And she went, a little apeshit and said, well, I'll write my own, which she did. And one of the things we need to think about is the continue, even someone as vocal, as prepared to be in the public spotlight as Jordan was. She was continuously also denied, dismissed, erased, called irrelevant, or basically pissed people off. I mean, she pissed off Toni Morrison. She pissed off Audrey Hepburn. She pissed off everybody. No, whatever. Okay. I can still remember June reading Poem About My Rights in New York City. I think it was at Barnard College, where I sometimes teach. I can also hear her reading Case in Point. And because, along with many others, I had done some activist work with her, she was always shepherding young poets around. I knew about the second rape. This was at a time when women, especially Black women, were under extraordinary pressure to not identify Black male oppressors. The whole doesn't share your dirty linen stuff was in the air. While there were many Black men who were great readers and champions of Jordan's work, there were plenty others who had not one good thing to say about her. And the same thing about Ntozake and about Audrey. All right. And Fatisha and a whole bunch of other people. 8. It's not that Black women, Black men have been silent. You know, because people always talk about, why will they say that? It is not that we're not heard, and if heard, our words are dismissed, misrepresented, or left to be neglected. June Jordan fought with words in poems, words in essays, in libraries, on bathroom stalls. Well, I put that in there. Against that calculated deafness. In Poem for Her Rights, she declares, I am not wrong. Wrong is not my words, in italics. And I'm going to go to something more recent. It just seems to me June seemed to have abundance of rage and an abundance of compassion. And depending on the topic or the one or the other or both would be brought to fore. I don't think she tried to balance them. Some items deserve only rage. And from the essay, Finding the Way Home, and this is from the essay collection, Technical Difficulties, African American Notes on the State of the Union, in which she discusses the murder of Lisa Steinberg, little girl who did not live to be 7, at the hands of her parents and the colonization of Palestinian lands by Israel. She moves from her own personal concerns to, quote, it is not difficult to identify related political issues that I must engage. This is my short list. For 1989, I dedicate myself to the memory of Lisa Steinberg and to the future of the Palestinian people, unquote. 1989. The Steinberg story is a tale of brutality placed on an unloved child and how systems of support were unable or unwilling to save her. That her family failed her and killed her is, at last, not unusual in this nation, or unfortunately, any. That families, communities, governments fail children whose homes are places of terror instead of comfort and support was something that Jordan, a mother as well as daughter, took to heart. And she says later in that essay, I believe that the issue of a home for Lisa Steinberg and the issue of a home for the Palestinian people are one and the same. The question is whether non-European and whether children everywhere possess a human right to sanctuary on this planet. Clearly, the question continues to be asked. There is also, in Technical Difficulties, extraordinary essay on the campaign, the Democratic nomination campaign of Jesse Jackson, which people seem to have just forgotten. And Jackson was fairly successful. Where did it all fall apart? When it hit the Middle East. And he actually said something decent about Palestinians, right? And she noted that some of Jackson's successes in terms of policy directives that the Democrats would have embraced had he been successful. He got the Democrats to not support the Contras, for instance. But that essay reminded me of how ahistorical much of the coverage of Obama's first campaign, as if Shirley Chisholm and Jesse Jackson hadn't even tried. I think that one of the things that Jordan does, and one of the things that I'm connecting all of these national and global things together, because she really was talking about whose right it is to live on this planet with safety and comfort and beauty and love, period. And if you can't save a 6-year-old child or a whole people, what's going on, right? What strikes me is that Jordan can, in her essays, explore a number of items that are the right reader serves to persuade, cajole, or educate. I love that she does that. She does not suffer fools. Her take on political correctness could be updated for the cancel culture crowd, and while her writing is often eloquent, she can be totally softy. She knows Brooklyn streets and academic hallways and street protests and the occasional fun night out with friends and lovers, or a good meal in her own home where light and art and memories abide. She was a woman who wrote, who she's a woman who did that delicate dance between rage and love. And she does it beautifully in my second favorite poem of Jordan's, because Erica read the first favorite poem. I must become a menace to my enemy. Now I have to find the poem. Oh, what did I do with it? Ah, and it is this one. Poem for South African women, which probably everybody in this call knows maybe by heart. Okay. Commemoration of the 40,000 women and children who, August 9th, 1956, presented themselves in bodily protest against the dumb pass in the capital of apartheid, presented at the United Nations August 9th, 1978. Our own shadows disappear at the feet of thousands, by the tens of thousands, pound the fallow land into new dust, that rising like a marvelous column will be fertile, even as the first woman whispering imagination to the trees around her made her righteous fruit from such deliberate defense of life as no other still will claim inferior to any other safety in the world. This is my favorite stanza. The whispers too they intimate to the inmost ear of every spirit now aroused, they carousing in ferocious affirmation of all peaceable and loving amplitude, sound a certainty unbounded heat from a baptismal smoke where, yes, there will be fire. And the babies cease alarm as mothers raising arms and heart high as the stars, so far unseen, nevertheless hurl into the universe a moving force, irreversible as light years traveling to the open eye. And who will stand? Who will join the standing up? And the ones who stood without sweet company will sing and sing back into the mountains, and, if necessary, even under the sea. And in italics, we are the ones we have been waiting for. Still my favorite. Okay. I think that Jordan, when she was writing about police killings, when she was writing about protest, which sometimes she was involved with, when she was writing about connecting the material success and the oppression that comes from a patriarchal and imperialistic society like this one to what was going on in the rest of the world, the global south, this is now called. She understood that um, every time, every demand we make has to be constant and daily. Jordan June was a poet who understood that civil and human rights have to be constantly demanded, given how much the powerful do to reduce and remove them, which right now is going on. So, anti-trans legislation, silencing of pro-Palestinian activists, scholars, and their allies, book banning, established media's inability to call fascism fascism. Well, she knew that these and other kinds of oppressive and suppressive measures were in the offering because they have always, in one form or another, been here. I am incredibly grateful to have been a young woman to have met June. The sisterhood, Intozaki Shange, by the way, only came to the sisterhood event once. So please read Courtney Thorson's book because there's a lot of mythology that has grown up about that. And yes, there was some competition in it, but it was also it was a great way in which all kinds of Black women could meet and from different points of their place as writers in the city. Some people were publishers, some people were novelists, some people were poets, some people were playwrights. Um, some of us, at one point, I think I even took the notes. I don't remember that, but that's what they tell me. And it was really, but it was more of a collection, and we could never quite figure out what more should we do, which is kind of great. So it didn't last very long. I mean, upwards to about a year and a half, 2 years. But what it did do was give a lot of Black women, including June, a chance to meet her peers and people who wanted to be her peer and have a real conversation around the stuff that we cared about, whatever that might be. And it was not always, it was sometimes, what's your recipe for something? And so that thing about the women in the 70s that I met, her, Audrey, Tony K. Bambara, Adrian Rich, and all kinds of, Joan Larkin, all of them were really fascinating and smart and complicated, and they did not always agree. And I think we need to remember that none of us have to agree with each other. But what I think they all did, even when they didn't speak to each other anymore, was to have incredible respect for each other's talent and the necessity of being in this world. If anything that June wanted us to do was that she wanted us to keep our, she wouldn't, because she was kind of a pacifist, I won't use this analogy, but she would have said, make sure that in your daily practice, however you do it, whether it's by prayer or protest, make sure that you fight daily for your right, because you're not wrong, and for everybody other people's rights on this planet and to fight against those who are working super hard to remove every last one of them.
Thank you, Patricia. Those profound recollections and weavings across Jordan's work, and in particular, getting to share about the sisterhood. We have some time for exchanges. So I want to invite everyone. So grateful that you all are here with us, sustained across these offerings, for you to think about some questions, some comments, even anecdotes, reflections about how you know June, how you know her work. We'll invite people to share. Um, please raise your hand, and then we'll be able to have Hannah and Matt with Clags who can help us out with unmuting you. And so I'm seeing a couple of folks already starting to raise their hands. And what we'll do is get to hear from a handful of folks. And I think we'll take a round of people, and given the time that we have, get to hear from everyone in community, and then we can kick it back to Erica, Marina, and Patricia towards the end. But we'll see how we do. Maybe for starters, we'll get to hear from Louise, then S, then Rose, and then Bob. So we'll first get to hear from Louise. Thank you.
Everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What an amazing event. I did post when I heard her voice that it made me cry. I haven't heard that voice in a long time. I was a longtime friend and I like to hope comrade of June's. But Connor, I'm coming back to the first thing you said, which was about not turning June into a saint. And so I'm going to tell you a memory. I'm an intellectual too. I'm political too. I appreciate all the really profound talk tonight. Here is one of my best memories of June. For some reason, she and I were about the same body size. And for some reason, we were in a Fifth Avenue department store wandering around. And I think this was June's idea that we went into the dressing room and we changed clothes. I wore her clothes, she wore mine, and we came out to see if anybody would notice. And of course, nobody did. So there's a lot of profound meaning, but I want you to, those of you who didn't know her, she was very sly, she was very seductive, and a part of her was a clown in the best sense of the word. So that's the memory I take tonight that I give to all of you.
Thank you so much, Louise. I
Playful,
love this.
playful is the word. Yes, playful.
She
Thank
was
you
a
so much,
flirt.
Louise.
She was a flirt. She was a flirt. She was a flirt. She was a flirt.
Oh wow. Thank you
More
so
than
much, Louise.
more than a
And we'll now get to hear from S. Please share.
Hi, thank you so much for this amazing, amazing event. Sorry, I can't figure out how to change the name, but my name is Susie. And I wanted to ask, I want to thank Erica because I learned about June Jordan's work really through her book and was so intrigued by her, the whole excavation of the conflict with Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde, who I've always really admired, particularly with everything that's going around on right now in the genocide in Gaza. And I'm just amazed at the research that you've done, Marina. Thank you so much also, Patricia, for sharing your memories. I wanted to ask Marina, do you know, because I know that June grew up in New York and then also in Brooklyn. Does she have anything to say about the Catholic Church in her archives?
So we have a question about the Catholic Church, and maybe Susie, what we can do is hold up your question, and if there are some thoughts that come to mind, then we can kick it back to you after getting to hear from a couple of folks. But we'll hold that question up. Did
Thank
June
you.
have anything to say about the Catholic Church? Thank you for that, Susie. I'm seeing you, Rose. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much, all three of you, really. My question is a little bit for you, Patricia and Marina. In the one of the things that draws me to um June Jordan and Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde and a few of the poets in New York at that time was their intention to have public conversation through their poetry. And I was curious in your essay, Marina, and if you know Patricia, there's so much document, as you said, between Adrienne Rich and June Jordan, and I'm wondering how much we're missing about what possible like I'm curious how much
Oh, it looks like there might be a little bit of a connection challenge.
like,
Um,
significant is out where Kate was unrepaired, whether to have back members were committed. Yeah, I guess
yeah, I think we got to hear a fair amount of that, Rose. Hearing about the question of what was contained in the archive, and then maybe some of the attempts at repair that might have been outside of the archival record, but perhaps in phone call or in personal communication. I think that's what I had heard a little bit from that. Um, so holding that question open, along with the question about the Catholic Church, I see you, Bob, if you want to jump in, and then after that we'll kick it back to the panelists before we get another round to get to hear what folks in the room are thinking about. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, well, I really want to thank all of you for such a wonderful panel. It's been so insightful. I'm working on a fellowship with outhistory.org about the Black Panther Party, queers, and the gay liberation movement. And so I have two questions. One is, what have any, and this is for whoever knows, what have any of you learned about June's role in and opinion of the Black Panther Party, how long she was a member, and in what chapter? I heard a short snippet of an undated YouTube video where she critiques the sexism she experienced in the party. And the second question is, how do you, or what do you know about what type of FBI or local police surveillance and harassment she underwent? And have any of her FBI files been released through the Freedom of Information Act? So that's it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. So a few specific questions related to your project. And I'm curious, Erica, Marina, or Patricia, would y'all like to reflect back on some of these questions? Um, or do we want to hear one more from Tremaine before we kick it to you all?
I don't know. I don't think June was not. I'm not quite sure why Susie asked about the Catholic Church. In Soldier, June talks about going to a high church, high Episcopal church. I mean, she was like a lot of West Indians was Episcopalian, and so and I think she liked it because I'm also an Episcopalian, so and high church Episcopalian is like all about robes and incense. So I think she was really into the theater of it all. But that's just my speculation.
The reason why I asked, and it's entirely a self-serving question, is because I'm studying Brooklyn, a history in the city, a university in the city of Brooklyn that was a Catholic university, and it had quite a big presence in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and as did the Catholic Church. And so I was just wondering if she had anything to say about that institution or really about kind of the power of religious institutions in the city of New York.
I never read anything, but she might have. I don't know.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Curious if Erica or Marina, if y'all would like to share some thoughts. I see you, Marina.
Sure. Thank you for all those questions. I'm not sure I know how to answer I don't know, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer the last question. Maybe Erica would know more. But I think in terms of Susie's question made me think of, it's kind of interesting to me. I didn't really discover June Jordan in my own work for a while, or I didn't start writing about her for a while because my research originally focused on Black women's politics through their spirituality and through their spiritual explorations. And June Jordan, I think, is actually like a really interesting figure who, unlike many of her contemporaries, doesn't publicly write about spirituality at all. And at one point, she has an exchange with her and Alice Walker, where she kind of criticizes Alice Walker. She's like, "You and your ancestor worship. If anything, we should be worshiping our children because we should be thinking about the future, not the past." Which I think is like, yeah, so I don't quite know what to make of that quote, but I do feel like it's a kind of
I
interesting
love it.
thing about her spirituality. And I did want to affirm also the question about Rose's question about what we don't see in the archive. Like the archive really is just the tip of the iceberg. And I feel blessed that there was at the Spelman Archives such a detailed paper trail, like a series of 3 or 4 letters that June Jordan or that Audre Lorde actually kept, and that June Jordan from her own archive seems to have not kept. So the fact that Audre Lorde kept them seems to me to indicate that it was something that was very salient for her, but we'll never know, we'll never know from Audre Lorde's perspective, the phone calls. We'll never know from Adrienne Rich's perspective, the phone calls that I'm sure did actually occur. And that, some of them, sometimes they'll reference calling one another. And even the Adrienne Rich and June Jordan's in-person meeting, they kind of obliquely narrate it through, June Jordan kind of obliquely narrates it through interviews and through her own archival references to it in letters from Adrienne Rich, but we actually really can't even know what their reconciliation conversation looked like, and we can't know how awkward it might have been for June Jordan and Audre Lorde to be at conferences together and in social space together after their falling out. There's a lot we can't know, and I don't want to pretend that the archive is comprehensive either.
Thank you for that, Marina. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I can just say quickly that there's nothing that I've seen that would have suggested that Jordan was a member of the Black Panther Party, and I think Adrienne Torf put it in the chat authoritatively. She was not a member of the Black Panther Party. Thank you for that. I also have never seen any FOIA records, FBI surveillance directed towards June, but I didn't do any FOIA requests, but I don't know of any out there either. So I would love to know if there are records out there.
Right on. Ongoing work ahead. I'm seeing Tremaine and then Adrienne. Would love to hear from you both. Go ahead, Tremaine.
Thank you all so much for what you've shared today. Erica, Marina, Patricia, it's such a beauty to be here with you all. I actually want to pivot to Adrienne Torf and let her speak first just because of the weight she carries in this conversation. So please go ahead, Adrienne.
Much respect. Thank you. Please go ahead, Adrienne. Welcome.
Thank you, Tremaine. I would actually be just as happy to defer to you as somebody with a fresh perspective on June. And Coco, Marina, Erica, your new generation of discoveries about June is really thrilling to witness. Patricia Spears Jones, to be in your presence is an honor. Thank you. I never, ever assumed to speak for June because she spoke for herself so fully and so beautifully. But I think I might be able to help steer people to answer some of the questions that are being raised here. The question about whether June was an activist relative to the Catholic Church, if I understand that correctly, I think it's helpful to know this about June, particularly with her students. She would regularly remind people to identify who is doing what to whom, and to name who is doing what, and to name to whom. And I think in that context, it's helpful to think about the fact that the Catholic Church is an institution. There are people in that institution who are doing things to other people. And so in answering that question about what was June's take on the Catholic Church, or what was her activism relative to the Catholic Church, I put in the chat a suggestion that people start by reading the poem for the New York Times in honor of Dr. Elizabeth Carlin, in which June, in a very tongue-in-cheek way, speaks to the Pope having any opinion whatsoever about abortion. Okay. So that's the first thing I wanted to offer here, along with my gratitude for all of what you are doing to keep June's life work and legacy very much alive, and to continuously connect it to the world in which we are living now, because I think many of us have seen in June her brilliance in identifying movements and situations and oppressions and brilliant revolutionary efforts that were both very important in the moment about which she was writing them, and are just as important, Patricia, as you're pointing out to us today. And I think that's why 22 years after she stopped writing, people are discovering her, and her legacy and her reputation is growing exponentially. I also, just for now, thank you, Patricia. You bet June was a flirt. Absolutely. And you bet there was competition, right? Particularly among Black women writers, not because it was inherent to their relationships, but because the publishing and the media institutions only saw fit to allow one Black woman writer, right? One Caribbean Black lesbian poet at a time. And in making those selections, those industries, the publishing industry and the media, the mainstream media, only wanted to hear from Black women writers what they deemed to be within the appropriate purview of a Black woman of that time, which meant, no, June Jordan, do not talk about Northern Ireland. No, June Jordan, do not talk about Palestine. No, June Jordan, don't talk about anything beyond what we understand to be the scope of the life of a Black woman poet in 1970-something, 80-something, 90-something. Mm-hmm. And Patricia, I hear you, I see you nodding your head. Mm-hmm. So I leave you all with that, and with extreme and heartfelt gratitude and delight in what you all are doing in your research and in your celebration of June's life and legacy. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, the gift of that comment. Thank you. I see Tremaine, and then I'll lift up a question in the chat that Matiange had shared. Please go ahead, Tremaine.
Thank you so much, Coco, and just to all of you. I'm just honored and floored and absorbing so much, and just blown by the fact that June Jordan was a flirt, but I guess Gemini sons, what will you do? So my question, I'll make it brief. I'm wondering, from the three of you, and even you could chime in, Coco, who've studied and really combed through the archives left behind by June Jordan, those of you who've known her personally, what do you think is the most important takeaway from her poetry, her essays, her, I'm learning now, playwriting? And if not that question, what do you think is the, oh my goodness, a Cancer? How embarrassing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Still checks out though. All of that to say, what do you think is also another takeaway that you think young Black femme poets like myself could have from the work and legacy of June Jordan? What are the most important or the most salient ones to you? Thank you all.
Thank you, Tremaine. Holding up Tremaine's question, honoring the ongoing legacy, in particular for young Black femme poets, and bringing up Matiange's question that was in the chat before kicking it back to Erica, Marina, and Patricia. Matiange had asked, would it be possible to comment on June's legacy in the current moment for other areas that we have not yet had as much chance to speak about today, such as policing and Trump? And so with that, I'm curious to hear some final reflections before we conclude for the night.
One thing that has really stayed with me from Patricia's comments were what you said, Patricia, about the fact that June Jordan had an abundance of rage and also an abundance of compassion. And just sort of thinking about what that means for our own approaches to comradeship in these times, like how urgent it feels to nurture both of those capacities, the capacity for rage and the capacity for compassion. And to Tremaine's question, it seems like poetry was for June Jordan the way of not tempering those capacities, but expressing them and mediating them. I'm thinking about that thing Marina shared about how Jordan says what she has to say to Audrey and Rich, and then is like, and here's my love, and here's my new poem.
Mhm.
So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, all of the poems, right? I don't know that there's one that I want to single out, but I think just like approaching her poetry with that sense of like how urgent it was for her to move her poems into the world, into sort of like live performances, but also in these correspondences that were really about repairing and sometimes not repairing broken political relationships.
Just,
Yeah. Yeah, to jump off of that, I mean, I think, yeah, I think the way that, to jump off of that, like something that you see oftentimes across June Jordan's work, I've seen the phrase come up in interviews. I've seen it come up in that letter that I cited, between that she writes to Adrienne Rich, after Adrienne Rich is offended, right? This dichotomy of what you are versus what you do. I think to me, that's kind of the biggest takeaway of June Jordan's legacy for today. I think June Jordan, both like in the praxis of that letter, as Erica cited, right? Like where she gave her critique, but was also kind and drew it back in because she wants to continue to grow politically and be in relation with that person. That is an example of what you do, but then there's also kind of a more global application of that. In kind of June Jordan's critique of, I think June Jordan would be very worried about these kinds of like Black women first, Black women only narratives, or like Black women self-care and that's it kind of narratives. Black women deserve to rest and don't need to, don't need to be politically engaged. I think June Jordan would be extremely wary of those things because for her, Black womanhood is a call for solidarity. It's a call to do something. And Black feminism, I guess she doesn't really call herself a Black feminist necessarily, but there is a kind of politics of being a Black woman that she holds herself to and that she encourages her friends to live up to through action. And it's not just identity. And to me, that's the most important part of her legacy in this political moment.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with you on that, but I also think we have to. I mean, I'm thinking about this and thinking about her in terms of her and Nikki Giovanni and that kind of idea of, identity was an issue in the sense that she was like, I am a very proud woman. I am a full person. I am not a statistic or a stereotype or any of these other things, nor are the people that who look like me are. I mean, I think she really, I mean, I think one of the things that she hated was was the was the idea of the ways in which I mean, she has this really funny uh, line about how she used to read all these articles about the Negro problem, and as if somehow Negroes were the reason why they were being oppressed, but you know, the whole 9 yards. And it's very funny, and she's very angry, and I think it's as if one of the other things that we all need to think about is, and going back to the earlier part of this conversation, was how do you live an ethical life in a place of late capitalism, of rising fascism, of global, environmental degradation. How do you do this, and how do you learn to both try to push, whatever it is that you think is important with your friends, and how to deal with their shortcomings? Because not everybody's going to agree with you or can do what you want them to do. And she always, always, always goes back to words. It's about language. Language is the most important thing in June Jordan's life. How she used it. I mean, and the things about the poems are, they're like, in the same way that a lot of New York school poems are about dailiness, certain kinds of documents of the world, where, where a Ted Berrigan would be talking about, whether you could get, cigarettes at a local bodega. She's talking about whether she needs to get on a bus to go see Fannie Lou Hamer. I mean, that's the difference, right? And both of them are interesting, but as a poet, her documentation of of her mother's life, her father's life, uh, the guys around the corner, her best friend, her former best friend, you know, I mean, the only thing she didn't do that I can think of is that she didn't write about designer clothes. I do that. But anyway, so, so it's those, it's the language to the language to the language. If you don't read it, I mean, the archives are just about what's in the background. What she was about was what she produced and put in the world and said, please take me seriously and take the people I'm with seriously. We have something to say about humanity. You people who are like trying to kill us all off need to go. Sorry, I tend to get very gestorial, but anyway, that's what I think. And so, Tremaine, as long as you're reading, 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 and also she wasn't writing in a vacuum. We were talking about her situation at CUNY, for instance. Nobody mentioned Sekou Sundiata, right?
Her student.
I mean, you know, I mean, academia can only do so much. If you don't start talking to some of the people, not just me, but lots of people who actually knew June and could really talk to, that's where some of this information is going to come from. It's not going to be in a box somewhere. Some of it will be, but not all of it.
Thank you, Patricia. And I see, Adrian, you had a final comment to share, and then I'll have a few announcements before we boogie for the night. And in honor of June, take good care of ourselves and each other. Go ahead, Adrian.
Thank you for letting me have a second shot. So much to say. There are two people on this call that I want to highlight and hold high. Louise Bernicott, we heard from you earlier. Louise, you and I never actually met, but your name was alive throughout June's life. I knew you were June's friend from way back then. There's another person on this call that I want to bring everyone's attention to, Frances Fox Piven, sociologist, scholar, co-author of Poor People's Movements. If ever there was a friendship that fell into the definition of comrade, I think the one that June and Frances shared for decades was one. And it included all that you all have been talking about, the greatest affection and respect, and the most, let's just say, dynamic disagreements. Okay. And I want to honor both Louise and Frances on this call, and also to encourage you all, scholars, new generations of scholars, to look into Frances Fox Piven's work, because it's absolutely essential and dovetails with so much of June's work. Thank you again.
Thank you, Adrian, for lifting up Louise and Frances. And just a brief closing comment for me. I was really honored to recently have a conversation with Frances about her friendship and comradeship with June. And so, exactly as you had named, we have such a powerful group of people who had gathered here to think about June's ongoing legacy. And I'm hoping that people feel fortified and feel a sense of direction, and also a sense of, even though we have an incredibly historic series of devastations that are surrounding us, that we also have these incredible wins of legacy and ancestral power that are at our backs as we continue to collaborate with each other towards liberation across the world, including everywhere where each of us are gathered. I want to name a couple of ways to stay connected. I put in the chat, these are some different links on Instagram for all of the folks who had put together this event. I also want to put on in the chat, these are a couple of events that are coming up with Center for the Humanities, two CUNY poets, Ashna Ali and Kendra Sullivan, and also the launch for the new Women's Studies Quarterlies issue, the title Unbearable Beings. The launch will be on December 16th. All of y'all are invited. And I actually have a review of June Jordan's collected poems directed by Desire, what I call June Jordan's Intifada incantations in Unbearable Beings. And we'll be excited to be in dialogue with you all about the ways that June had also really lifted up and held that word Intifada as a declaration of love and solidarity with Palestinian people. I also included my email at the bottom, connorthomasreed@gmail.com. As I said at the beginning, we would just be scratching the surface tonight, but please encourage y'all to stay connected. If you have more questions, comments, different events that you would like to highlight, please share it with me and we'll be able to circulate it with everyone who RSVP'd. I want to ask everyone once again to thank Erica, Edward, Marina Magloire, and Patricia Spears Jones to reflect on June Jordan's legacy. And I hope that you all felt a sense of living room here tonight, and that it's a living room that can grow and grow as we continue to do this work. So thank you all again, and hope that you take care of each other in these times ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you. Yes,
Adrian,
good night. Wonderful.
Adrian, thank you. Thank you, Connor.